Whispers in the dark. Chloe Carter and her 6-year-old son, Dylan, had just moved into their new home, a small weathered house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house, with its creaky floors and dimly lit hallways, had an unsettling atmosphere, but Chloe dismissed the unease as just the awkwardness of adjusting to a new place. However, that unease began to deepen one evening when Dylan, wide-eyed and whispering, mentioned hearing strange noises coming from the attic. He described them as soft whispers, barely audible but unmistakably there. Chloe, forcing a smile, assured him it was just the house settling, a common occurrence in older homes. Yet, as the days passed, Dylan's curiosity about the attic grew. He asked questions and lingered by the attic door. Chloe, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread, sternly forbade him from going near it, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The unsettling sounds from the attic didn't stop. In fact, they only grew worse. What began as faint whispers soon turned into distinct creaks and soft footsteps, echoing through the silent house late at night. Dylan, now visibly anxious, repeatedly told Chloe that the whispers were calling his name. Each time, his small voice trembled with fear, but Chloe continued to reassure him, though she no longer believed her own words. As the days passed, Chloe began noticing odd things around the house. Dylan's toys would be moved from their usual spots, doors that she distinctly remembered closing would be slightly ajar, and small items, like her keys or a hairbrush, would disappear, only to reappear in strange places. At first, she tried to rationalize it, blaming her exhaustion from the move. But the growing frequency of these disturbances chipped away at her confidence, leaving behind a gnawing fear that something or someone was in the house with them. Unable to shake the dread, Chloe started losing sleep, staying up late into the night, straining her ears for the slightest sound. Her imagination ran wild with every creak and groan of the old house, and the once cozy home now felt like a menacing trap. The fear that she desperately tried to hide from Dylan was slowly consuming her, turning every shadow into a potential threat and every noise into a sign of impending danger. The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the walls and lightning illuminating the dark corners of the house. But inside, something far more terrifying was brewing. The noises that had been haunting Chloe and Dylan for weeks reached a horrifying crescendo: loud thumps, the creak of footsteps, and those eerie whispers, now echoing from all around. Dylan clung to Chloe, his little body trembling with fear, and Chloe knew she could no longer pretend everything was okay. The time had come to confront whatever lurked in their home. Grabbing a flashlight, Chloe steeled herself and headed toward the attic. Each step up the creaky stairs felt like a march toward doom, her heart pounding louder with every creak of the wood beneath her feet. When she finally reached the attic door, she hesitated, gripping the handle with a shaky hand. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and shone the flashlight into the darkness. The beam of light cut through the dust-filled air, revealing a scene of chaos. The attic was in disarray. Old, forgotten items were pushed aside to make room for makeshift bedding, scattered food wrappers, and personal items Chloe had thought were merely misplaced. The horrifying truth hit her like a punch to the gut. Someone had been living up here, watching them, creeping down in the dead of night while they slept. As the realization sank in, Chloe's flashlight caught movement in the corner of the attic. She turned quickly, her breath hitching in her throat. A shadowy figure, gaunt and wild-eyed, emerged from the darkness, staring at her with a twisted grin. Frozen in fear, Chloe's mind raced, but there was no time to think. The intruder was real and he was inches away. Chloe's survival instincts kicked in, and with a burst of adrenaline, she bolted from the attic, slamming the door shut behind her. She locked it, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the latch. Without wasting a second, she scooped up Dylan and dashed to her bedroom, her heart racing as she dialed 911. The sound of sirens in the distance brought a fleeting sense of relief. Help was on the way. But as she tried to calm Dylan, something caught her eye. The closet door, which she always kept closed, was now slightly ajar. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the dark gap. Before she could react, the intruder lunged out from the shadows, his wild eyes locked on hers. The room filled with a piercing scream, abruptly cutting off as the story plunges into darkness, leaving the viewer to imagine the terrifying end. The doll in the attic. Zara Turner and her 8-year-old daughter, Riley, had just moved into their new home, a grand, century-old Victorian house that Zara had fallen in love with for its historical charm. As a history teacher with a passion for antiques, Zara was thrilled to explore the house's rich past. The attic, in particular, piqued her interest. Cluttered with antique furniture and dust-covered trunks, it felt like a treasure trove waiting to be uncovered. While cleaning out the attic, Zara discovered a beautifully ornate, yet unsettling porcelain doll nestled in one of the trunks. The doll, with its delicate features and vintage dress, seemed out of place. Zara felt a chill of unease but brushed it off. Riley, however, was captivated by the doll and insisted on keeping it in her room. Shortly after, strange things began to happen. Cold drafts where there shouldn't be any, doors creaking open on their own, and an uncanny sensation that the doll's eyes were following Zara around the room. Despite these subtle warnings, Zara dismissed them as quirks of their new old house. As the days passed, Riley's fascination with Lola grew into an unsettling obsession. She began talking to the doll as if it were a real person, sharing secrets in hushed tones and even asking Lola for advice. Zara noticed that her once cheerful daughter had become withdrawn, spending more time alone in her room, always with the doll in hand. At night, Zara could hear Riley whispering to Lola, the conversations growing more intense. Whenever Zara expressed concern, Riley became defensive, insisting that Lola was her friend and that there was nothing to worry about. Disturbed by the change in her daughter, Zara decided to dig deeper into the doll's past. She searched online and in old records, uncovering a chilling history. Lola had once belonged to a young girl who had died under mysterious circumstances, her death surrounded by whispers of possession and dark rituals. The more Zara read, the more she feared that the doll was no ordinary antique. Desperate to protect Riley, Zara resolved to get rid of Lola. She threw the doll away, but it inexplicably reappeared in the attic the next day, sitting eerily in the same spot where Zara had first found it. Each time she tried to discard Lola, the doll would return, and with each reappearance, its presence grew more sinister. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and Zara began hearing faint giggling echoing from the attic late at night. The once welcoming house now felt like a trap, closing in around her and her daughter as Lola's influence tightened its grip. Zara could no longer ignore the malevolent presence that had taken hold of her home and her daughter. Desperate to protect Riley, she made the only decision she could. Lola had to be destroyed. Gathering the necessary tools, a hammer, lighter fluid, and matches, Zara steeled herself for what she knew would be a terrifying confrontation. As she ascended the stairs to the attic, a sense of dread washed over her, heavier with each step. The once familiar attic now felt foreign, filled with an oppressive energy that seemed to push against her resolve. Entering the attic, Zara was immediately struck by the change in the atmosphere. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and she could feel Lola's presence like a living, breathing entity. The doll sat in its usual spot, but its expression seemed different, more sinister, as if aware of what Zara intended to do. Her hands trembled as she approached, but she forced herself to raise the hammer, ready to end this nightmare. But as she prepared to strike, the attic came alive. Objects began to move on their own, boxes shifting and toppling, the walls creaking as if the house itself was resisting her actions. Zara hesitated, her grip faltering as she heard a voice, Riley's voice, pleading with her to stop. The voice was filled with fear, but something about it wasn't right. It echoed unnaturally, blending with the oppressive energy in the room. Zara's determination wavered as the doll's malevolence grew more palpable, the room closing in on her, the boundaries between reality and horror blurring as she stood frozen, unsure if she was saving her daughter or falling into the doll's trap. Just as Zara raised the hammer to destroy Lola, a chilling realization hit her. Riley was nowhere to be found. Panic surged through her as she dropped the hammer and frantically searched the house, calling out for her daughter. But the only response was an eerie, childlike giggling that seemed to echo from the attic. Dread gripped Zara as she was drawn back to where the doll sat waiting. In the attic, Zara's breath caught in her throat. Lola was no longer just a doll. The figure sitting before her had Riley's face, but its once porcelain eyes were now disturbingly human, brimming with a malevolent intelligence. Zara's heart pounded as she desperately searched for her real daughter, but there was no sign of Riley. The horrific truth sank in: Lola had taken on Riley's appearance, consuming her daughter. Frozen in terror, Zara realized she was utterly powerless as the doll's twisted smile grew wider, leaving her to face the unimaginable horror of what Lola had become. The portal in the rafters. Sam Richards, a 22-year-old college student, returned to his childhood home, a secluded farmhouse nestled deep in the woods, after the sudden passing of his parents. The house, steeped in memories, felt eerily quiet without them. But as Sam began packing up their belongings, he couldn't shake the feeling that it held secrets he had never known. While cleaning out the dusty attic, Sam stumbled upon an old, circular trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of debris. Curiosity got the better of him, and he cleared the dust away to reveal a small, concealed room. Inside, he found a weathered mirror leaning against the wall. The mirror was ancient, its frame etched with strange, indecipherable symbols that seemed to hum with a faint, otherworldly energy. As Sam absent-mindedly brushed his fingers against the mirror's surface, he caught a glimpse of something unsettling, a flicker of another world within the glass. The reflection showed a dark, twisted landscape filled with shadows and monstrous shapes that seemed to move. Startled, Sam quickly pulled his hand away, dismissing the vision as a trick of the light. But the mirror's strange aura lingered, hinting at a danger he had yet to understand. The day after his unsettling discovery, Sam ran into Mr. Thornton, the reclusive neighbor who had lived in the area for as long as Sam could remember. Mr. Thornton, a man of few words, noticed Sam's uneasy demeanor and asked what troubled him. Hesitant at first, Sam mentioned the old mirror he had found in the attic. Thornton's expression darkened, and he gravely warned Sam to stay away from the mirror, hinting that it was more than just an antique. He spoke of past owners who had encountered the mirror and were driven to madness by the horrors it revealed. A portal to another dimension, he said, a gateway to a world best left untouched. But instead of heeding the warning, Sam found himself drawn even deeper into the mirror's mystery. The images it showed him became more vivid, the flickers of the other world now lasting longer and pulling him in with every glance. He began to hear faint whispers, feel cold drafts that seemed to emanate from the mirror, and catch glimpses of shadows darting at the edges of his vision. The mirror's influence grew stronger, tightening its grip on Sam's mind, blurring the lines between reality and the dark, twisted dimension it revealed. Ignoring Mr. Thornton's ominous tale, Sam continued to investigate, unable to resist the mirror's pull. One night, the flickers in the glass turned into a full-blown vision. The mirror no longer reflected his own image, but instead showed a monstrous creature looming in the dark landscape beyond. Transfixed, Sam reached out to the glass. Suddenly, the creature's clawed hand shot through the mirror, latching onto him with a vice-like grip. Before Sam could react, he was violently yanked into the other world, his screams swallowed by the darkness as he disappeared into the mirror's depths. Sam found himself in a nightmarish landscape that was a grotesque, distorted reflection of the world he knew. The sky was a swirling mass of dark clouds, casting a sickly, unnatural light over the barren, craggy ground. Towering, twisted structures loomed in the distance, their jagged forms barely distinguishable against the gloom. Grotesque creatures slithered and lurked in the shadows, their eyes gleaming with malevolence as they watched him. But the worst of them all was the creature that had dragged him into this hellish dimension. It stalked him relentlessly, its intentions unclear but undeniably sinister. Panic surged through Sam as he ran, his mind racing for a way out. He remembered the strange symbols etched into the mirror's frame and realized that they might hold the key to reversing the portal. His only chance of escape lay in deciphering them before the creature could catch him. As he stumbled through the twisted landscape, the creature's guttural growls grew closer, its heavy footsteps echoing in the still air. Desperation mounting, Sam found a moment of safety behind a massive, jagged boulder. With shaking hands, he tried to recall the symbols he had seen. The mirror had shimmered when he touched it. Perhaps there was a pattern, a sequence he could follow. As the creature's shadow loomed over him, Sam frantically traced the symbols in the air, focusing all his will on the memory of the mirror. Just as the creature lunged, its claws inches from his throat, the air around Sam began to shimmer. The distorted landscape flickered, and with a final burst of energy, Sam pulled himself through the portal. He tumbled back into the attic, the air heavy with the scent of dust and decay. The mirror behind him went dark, its surface now cracked and dull. Exhausted and trembling, Sam lay on the attic floor, believing he had narrowly escaped the nightmare. But the unease lingering in the air suggested that the nightmare might not be over yet. As Sam lay on the attic floor, struggling to steady his breath, a sudden, sharp sound cut through the silence, glass shattering. His heart skipped a beat as he turned to see the mirror breaking apart, shards falling to the floor in slow motion. Relief quickly turned to horror as the creature that had stalked him in the other dimension began to emerge from the broken pieces, its monstrous form twisting and shifting as it crossed into the real world. Before Sam could react, he felt a force pulling him toward the shattered mirror. In a terrifying reversal, Sam was yanked into the fragments, his body twisting as he was trapped behind the glass. He stared out in horror as the creature, now fully emerged, began to morph, taking on his appearance, his very identity. Sam pounded helplessly on the inside of the mirror, his screams muffled as he watched the creature, now a perfect replica of himself, step into his life. And Sam's silent, desperate pleas trapped within the mirror, forced to watch as the creature begins their reign of terror in the world he once knew. The Curse of the Attic Door. Helen Adams, a 45-year-old historian with a deep love for local legends, had always been fascinated by the stories of old houses. So when she inherited a grand, old mansion from a distant relative, she saw it as an opportunity to uncover new mysteries. The mansion, surrounded by dense woods, had a dark reputation among the locals. Rumors of a curse that had plagued the house for generations. At the center of these whispers was the attic, sealed off with a heavy, padlocked door that hadn't been opened in decades. Helen moved into the mansion with her 10-year-old son, William, an adventurous and curious boy who quickly became fixated on the attic door. Despite the ominous warnings from the townsfolk, Helen couldn't resist the urge to dig into the mansion's past. As she began her research, piecing together the house's history, William's obsession with the attic grew stronger. He couldn't shake the feeling that the door held secrets that were meant to be uncovered, even as Helen tried to focus on unraveling the truth behind the curse that shadowed their new home. One afternoon, while Helen was engrossed in her research, William finally succumbed to the temptation that had been gnawing at him since they arrived. He had found an old, rusty key hidden in a forgotten drawer, and with it, he managed to unlock the attic door. As the door creaked open, a bone-chilling wind rushed through the house, carrying with it the scent of decay and the unmistakable feeling of something ancient and malevolent stirring awake. The atmosphere in the mansion changed immediately. Objects began to move on their own. Chairs scraping across the floor, picture frames tilting askew, and books falling from shelves without reason. Doors that were securely closed would suddenly slam shut with a force that rattled the walls. At night, the once quiet house filled with eerie, disembodied whispers, as if a chorus of unseen voices were holding a secret conversation in the dark. Alarmed by the sudden escalation of strange events, Helen threw herself into her research, desperate to understand what they had unleashed. Her search led her to a forgotten chapter in the mansion's history. The attic had been sealed generations ago to imprison the vengeful spirit of a wronged ancestor, cursed to haunt the family forever. This ancestor had met a brutal end and had sworn revenge on the family line. Realizing the gravity of what had been done, Helen was horrified to understand that William had inadvertently freed a malevolent force, now loose and growing stronger with every passing day. Realizing the danger that had been unleashed, Helen knew she had to act quickly. Armed with the knowledge of the spirit's dark history, she set out to reseal the attic, hoping to contain the vengeful ghost before it was too late. She gathered old family records, sacred symbols, and anything she could find that might help her reverse the curse. But when she returned to the attic, it was clear that the spirit had grown too powerful. The air was thick with a malevolent presence, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The spirit had been feeding off the fear and chaos it had unleashed, growing stronger with each passing day. Helen's attempts to trap the spirit failed miserably. It had already begun to target William directly, appearing to him in his dreams as a comforting figure, manipulating him with twisted promises. The boy who had once been full of life and curiosity now grew distant, his eyes shadowed with a cold, vacant look. He began speaking in strange, old-fashioned ways, using phrases and mannerisms that didn't belong to a child of his age. Desperation clawed at Helen as she tried everything she could think of to break the spirit's hold on her son, but nothing worked. The spirit's influence tightened its grip, and she watched in helpless horror as William's behavior grew more erratic, his voice taking on a deeper, more sinister tone. It became painfully clear that the spirit had fully possessed William, using his body as a vessel to carry out its long-awaited revenge on the Addams family. Helen's heart shattered as she realized that her son was no longer in control. He was now a puppet of the vengeful spirit, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. In a final, desperate attempt to save her son, Helen confronted the spirit directly. Armed with every bit of knowledge and courage she could muster, she begged and commanded the spirit to leave William's body. But the spirit had grown too powerful, its grip on William unbreakable. It mocked her feeble attempts, using her son's voice to taunt her as it solidified its control. Helen could only watch in despair as the spirit, now fully possessing William, turned her once loving child into a cruel, twisted version of himself. With a cruel laugh, the spirit used William's hands to shove Helen into the attic, slamming the door shut and sealing her inside. The attic, now a dark, cold prison, became a place of unending torment. Trapped within its walls, Helen's sanity began to unravel. The spirit's whispers filled the air, blending with the sound of William's voice, now warped and cruel, mocking her endlessly. As days turned to weeks, Helen's mind fractured, her reality consumed by the horrors around her. In the end, Helen was left with the devastating truth. Her son was gone, his body a mere vessel for a vengeful spirit. She was doomed to a life of madness, locked away in the attic's confines, with nothing but the echoes of her son's twisted laughter to keep her company. The hidden heirloom. Lisa and Graham Morgan had recently moved into a spacious, modern home, a new chapter in their lives. Lisa, a logical and skeptical lawyer, and Graham, who had a deep fascination with family history and genealogy, were excited to make the house their own. During the renovations, they discovered something unexpected: a hidden attic space that wasn't mentioned in the house's floor plan. Intrigued by this mysterious find, they decided to explore the concealed area. In the dim, dusty attic, they uncovered an old chest. Inside were weathered letters and a strange, ornate locket that seemed out of place in their modern home. Lisa dismissed the items as curious antiques, but Graham was immediately captivated by them, particularly the locket, which seemed to call out to him. As they read through the letters, they uncovered hints of a dark chapter in Graham's family history, a disowned and cursed ancestor whose name had been deliberately erased from all records. Unbeknownst to them, this discovery would unravel a series of events tied to a vengeful spirit long buried in the past. Graham's curiosity quickly turned into an obsession as he delved into the mystery of the letters and the locket they had found in the hidden attic. Hours turned into days as he pored over old family records, genealogy websites, and dusty archives, piecing together the fragmented history of his ancestors. The deeper he dug, the more he became convinced that the locket held some kind of power, a secret that could change their lives. The disowned ancestor, whose name had been deliberately erased, seemed to be at the center of this dark history. Graham believed the locket was the key to uncovering the truth and perhaps even unlocking something greater. As Graham's obsession grew, strange occurrences began to plague the house. Cold spots appeared in rooms that had never been drafty, lights flickered and dimmed for no apparent reason, and shadows seemed to move on their own, just out of sight. At first, Lisa dismissed these incidents as coincidences or electrical issues, but as they became more frequent, even she couldn't ignore them. Graham, however, seemed unfazed. If anything, the disturbances only deepened his obsession. He became increasingly withdrawn, spending long hours in the attic with the locket, mumbling to himself as if in conversation with someone unseen. Lisa, though skeptical, started to sense a presence in the house, something tied to the locket that Graham had become so fixated on. As she dug deeper into the letters, she uncovered the chilling truth. The ancestor had been cursed after a betrayal by a family member, their spirit bound to the locket in a vengeful rage. The more Lisa read, the more she realized that this spirit was not at rest. It was seeking revenge, and Graham was falling under its influence. The locket wasn't just an heirloom. It was a conduit for a ghostly ancestor bent on carrying out a long-awaited retribution. Graham's obsession with the locket quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous. He became convinced that the locket held the key to unlocking unimaginable wealth or power, and his behavior began to change drastically. Once a loving and rational husband, he grew secretive, paranoid, and increasingly cold toward Lisa. He spent nearly all his time in the hidden attic, poring over the letters and speaking in hushed tones to the locket, as though he was communing with someone only he could hear. Lisa's attempts to reach out to him were met with suspicion and hostility, as Graham became more and more detached from reality. One night, unable to sleep, Lisa decided to confront Graham and drag him away from the attic that had consumed him. As she climbed the creaky stairs, she could hear him talking, his voice low and eerie, as if it wasn't entirely his own. When she reached the attic, she found him standing in the center of the room, the locket clasped tightly in his hand. His eyes were glazed over, his face twisted in an expression of malevolent determination. The air around him was thick with a chilling presence. Suddenly, Graham's head snapped toward her, but the man she loved was no longer there. The spirit of the vengeful ancestor had fully overtaken him. In a voice that was both his and not his, the spirit revealed a horrifying truth. Graham was the reincarnation of the very family member who had betrayed them so many years ago. The ancestor had waited for this moment, and now they were back to exact their revenge. In a final, desperate attempt to save her husband, Lisa lunged for the locket, trying to wrest it from Graham's grip. But he was too strong. the vengeful spirit now fully possessing him, fueling his unnatural strength. The house itself seemed to come alive in response, its walls creaking and groaning as the spirit's power grew. The floor beneath them trembled, and the air grew thick with an oppressive force that made it hard to breathe. As they struggled, the attic door suddenly slammed shut with a deafening bang, the force of it shaking the entire house. The sound echoed through the walls, sealing them inside. Graham, or what was left of him, laughed. A cold, cruel sound that sent chills down Lisa's spine. The spirit, fully in control, taunted her, revealing that they were now trapped together, their fates sealed by the ancient curse. The house seemed to close in around them, the walls pressing closer, as if the very structure was intent on keeping them there forever. The story ends with Lisa's realization that there is no escape. She is trapped in a nightmare, doomed to share the attic with the spirit that had claimed her husband. As Lisa watched in horror, the spirit's control over Graham solidified. His expression twisted into a sneer as he advanced on her, the locket glowing faintly in his hand. Desperate, Lisa tried to reach the man she knew was still somewhere inside, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Graham, fully possessed by the vengeful spirit, attacked her with a terrifying strength, forcing her to defend herself against the husband she no longer recognized. The attic, once a hidden space of curiosity, had become a battleground between love and an ancient hatred that refused to die.